Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. In recognition of National Emergency Preparedness Month, Walker's Legacy, in partnership with Comcast RISE, thought it very timely to bring together women, thought leaders, and all of our community members as we lend our expertise in the conversation around emergency preparedness. My name is Alexis Squire, and I have the pleasure and honor of serving as the Interim Chief Service Officer here in Washington, D.C., and the Director of Serve D.C. on behalf of Mayor Muriel Bowser. And I welcome you, and we're going to have an engaging conversation about really relevant topics. September is special to Serve DC because this is what we do, emergency preparedness. And I have some dynamic leaders here with me. We're going to have an engaging conversation and looking forward to hearing just some tidbits, some lessons learned, and some motivational best practices that will help equip all of our viewers with how to be prepared. So please join us. Get ready for some really intriguing and engaging conversations. Earlier this year, Walker's Legacy Foundation released a post-COVID-19 impact study in partnerships with the Gates Foundation, and they took a deep dive into the impacts of the pandemic on multicultural women, especially entrepreneurs. The results were undeniable. But one of the key findings that stood out was emergency preparedness. More than 80% of women stated that they did not have an emergency preparedness strategy. Obviously, this was, raised some red flags, and Walker's Legacy, they wanted to do something about this, as we know that they always do when it comes to women, especially with their businesses. And so this conversation is really designed to bring light to that study and to, again, bring additional insight, information of how do women really become prepared, stay prepared, be resilient. And we're going to talk about preparedness, not on one dimension, but really all the way around comprehensively and multifaceted. So please, just really stay tuned with us as we delve into this intriguing conversation. With me, I'm not here by myself. With me are two dynamic leaders who have a lot to say about being prepared, and you'll learn from different perspectives. And so we are really honored to have the first be Brandi Harleaux, who is the CEO of South Post Oak Recycling Center. And we are also joined by Michelle Hammonds, who is the Director of the Office of Financial Empowerment and Education within the District of Columbia, Department of Insurance, Security, and Banking. You have a long title, but I know it is deserving. So I will hear more from these ladies in just a moment. And we're going to get started with some questions. If you have questions for me, please, be sure to ask, and we will start this conversation. The first one I'm going to direct at you, Brandi. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, Alexis. How are you?
I am well. I'm well. Thank you, first of all, for joining us today. And thank you for the work that you do.
It's a pleasure being here.
So my first question to you, Brandi, is from the lens of a small business representative. How did you see that COVID impacted you as a small business owner?
It's a good question. And I think many small businesses and just businesses in general did not expect COVID, right? And there's been several crises. And I think, people say every 7 to 8 years, you can expect an inflection if you're kind of in the business community. But I have to say, we hadn't seen anything like it. But how did it impact us? It impacted us several ways, one of which was that we needed to slow down business. So the first thing that I saw was just kind of the legislative relationships and benefits kicking in. I serve on the board of the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, which is our trade association. And we were immediately working with our DC team on ensuring that we were classified as an essential business. So that was one of the first things that we pivoted to focus on, is just to make sure that we could stay in operation. As a small business owner, I wanted to make sure that my people, as I say, or my team stayed employed. So we had to start there. all while just trying to figure out what was going on, what was the landscape with a lot of unknown variables. The second thing was just looking at safety. We have to look at safety, the safety of our employees, the safety of our customers, like we've never had to look at. Obviously, safety has been at the forefront of our operations, being in the metal recycling space or the manufacturing space. But this was safety in a completely different capacity. Typically, we're making sure that, our cranes and our trucks are moving properly and people have the proper PPE. And this focus was on a completely different level. It's like, even how close can you get to people? And so we had to change our safety protocols immediately. And while there's much more, the last thing I would say it caused us to change or pivot really quickly is just how we led. As a leader, I immediately went into a mode of this ship cannot sink. And so it was a survival mode. I mean, I can go through many other things that we did, but really kind of centering self amidst the chaos and the confusion and the unknowns. And for me, standing in faith to say, okay, which direction are we going? And how do we move forward while keeping my people from panicking? And staying transparent at the same time, saying, here's what I know and here's what I don't know, but we will make it through.
Nice. I think what I'm hearing you say is something that we experienced here at Serve too, is that you were exercising your leadership skills in ways that you had not anticipated, right? And it brought out another side of us really as women leaders to say, okay, I'm going to be as transparent as possible. But I heard you say something that is really dynamic to women leaders too. You said, the first thing you went to is my team. I wanted to make sure that they were okay, that we were sustained, and that we could all stay afloat. And that is really one of the dynamic things about women, especially in the entrepreneurial space, is that we're never just thinking about ourselves, right? Or even just the mission, but it's those who are around us that help to make the mission. And so I would agree that this experience was unprecedented, but it brought out a lot of leadership skills that I'm happy to hear from you. I do have a follow-up question to that, and that is, before the pandemic, and you mentioned that you weren't embracing this in the ways that you were traditionally used to. Did you have an emergency preparedness plan before this pandemic? And if not, tell me a little bit more about what you're doing now to kind of bring forth something an emergency plan.
I think about that question similarly to how I think about my personal life, and for me, because it's my business and our business. I take a complete vested interest in it, meaning it is my responsibility as a leader to ensure that when it rains, because it will rain, there is some cushion there. Okay. And so, for me personally, it's important to have what I call a rainy day fund, because the question is not, will it rain? It's when it will rain. And so the same stands true for us in business. So we did have about 3 months worth of reserves available for us, but that was quickly depleted, to be honest. And so I'm sure we'll talk. So I was very happy for grants and PPP funding that came through, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. And the intangible pre-COVID plan, and it became very interesting. I actually journaled on this several times, and I think the impact of existing relationships, and specifically what became so prevalent was banking relationships. I can't speak enough. I was on a soapbox for several months telling people that I am so grateful through the trainings that I've had from business school to small business training, the value of having not just one banking relationship, but several banking relationships. So with our strategy has been to have relationships with small, medium, and larger banking institutions. And I have never seen the impact of that so strongly until we hit COVID, because each of them had different benefits and each of them had different weaknesses. And so surprisingly, for us, it was the small and the mid-sized banking institutions that came in timely and early. And it's not a knock at the large financial institutions, because they are needed and there's value as well. But I used to work in aerospace, and we used to joke, we say things shift almost like turning a battleship. And my sense was during this season, that's the pace at which larger banking institutions had to operate. So if that was your only pre-COVID strategy or source of alignment from a banking standpoint, you might have been feeling the pain a lot longer, or a lot more, just acute than if you had a short-term or mid-size, not short-term, but smaller and mid-size relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to hear. And I think something key that you said is relationships, right? I think if we had never leveraged the work that we were doing, again, something that typically women entrepreneurs do well, and we know the significance of, but this was certainly the time to leverage those relationships, as you mentioned, especially with our anyone who could help us with resourcing. And certainly our banking community did that and continues to do that to support women-led businesses. And so it is very fitting that we have Michelle. Welcome, Michelle. Thank you so much. We would love to hear a little bit more about you and who you represent. And then I have a few questions for you as well.
All right, fantastic. Michelle Hammonds, the Director of the Office of Financial Empowerment and Education at the District of Columbia's Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. And I was just listening to what Brandi had to say, and she hit some really key points that definitely relate to the work that I do. In my office and in my agency, Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking, we act as the district's regulator for financial services. So we work with these businesses, with these entities, banking, insurance, and securities, to make sure that district residents are taken care of appropriately. We really want to make sure we cultivate a regulatory environment that protects consumers and attracts and retains financial services firms to the district. We also focus on empowering and educating residents on financial matters. And then last, but certainly not least, we provide access to financing for district small businesses. And so in the thick of COVID-19, we were working with both, all of the industries, but really particularly in banking and insurance, to make sure that information was able to be disseminated to our residents and our small businesses so that they can know what options are available to them during this time. So that was very much a key part of our strategy in the District of Columbia, to make sure that small businesses had the type of resources that were important to them. And we also took the time to listen to our small businesses to see what was important to them, where were their needs. And we as a city really gathered, we really came around our small businesses and provided these particular resources so that we could be timely in the work that we were doing.
Nice, thank you. So you mentioned something, you said that you all were sharing information, which was really great, because Brandi, I think you can agree that while the resources, you needed to get them, that what was dynamic and kind of interesting with this pandemic was that you needed the resources, but you needed so much information as well. There were so many nuances about just the nature of this health emergency, and certainly those resources and how to correctly and appropriately attain them. So you were sharing information so that folks could get the resources. But then you mentioned something else, that was listening. I saw that a lot in our work. Serve DC is really at the center of the multi-sector community, right? So we help our residents and our community members really connect better to the services and resources from nonprofits, from the business community, and the philanthropic community. And so when I didn't know what to do, I really knew that we should listen. And so we did a lot of surveying, a lot of phone calls, a lot of late night phone calls with our constituents to really make sure that we were understanding everyone's needs. And so I heard that with you, Michelle, saying that too, that, first you needed to understand how business operations were affected, because there were so many, unique ways in which our businesses were affected by the pandemic. Michelle, you mentioned, and certainly you have a rich background in financial management and planning and helping our communities and businesses know how to navigate those. What advice can you give business leaders in how to plan ahead? We know that financially, when we think about being prepared, right? Physically, that's one dynamic to it. There's your culture of your organization, of your business is another, but financial preparedness is critical. What giveaways, takeaways, or what kind of best practices or advice can you give to the business community around how to be financially prepared?
So thank you for that question. And I kind of want to answer it in two ways. I want to take it from the perspective of just the business and thinking about the business, but also knowing that such a large number of the businesses in the area are also small businesses. Many are owned by women, that there's also a personal financial emergency plan that people need to take into consideration as well. But Brandi even said it when she gave her answer. She had about 3 months of expenses saved up in probably one of her business operations accounts. And I think that's an important thing because you want to be able to have cash on hand. But most importantly, as you're thinking about what could be going wrong or what could happen, you want to first do some general planning. You want to think, is your business ready for a disaster? And disaster covers multiple areas. It's not, we had the public health emergency, but we're also going through tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, all these different things that can happen. And so you want to make sure first that you have your business ready should a disaster strike. And then you want to also make sure you minimize your risk. And that's by having the appropriate types of insurance in place. Insurance is one of those things that you need it and you want to have it when you don't need it. You don't want to be trying to get it when you need it the most. And so making sure that you have the right type of insurance in place for your business is going to be critical, whether it be general commercial liability insurance, also looking at business continuity planning and business continuity insurance products. Those are going to be important. What we found is that many people and many insurance policies were not ready for the public health emergency, or they did not have that type of language in their policies. And so now the industry has caught up and they're starting to make adjustments, but that's something to think about moving forward. So it's always important to review your current insurance policies and making sure you do have a relationship with your insurance broker so that they're going over that information with you. That's going to be critical. So that relationship piece, and that relationship is still important in insurance, but also in the banking world, because many people, when they needed cash to keep their business sustained, having those relationships with the financial institutions, again, is not something that you want to wait on. You want to start building those up, especially as individual businesses grow. Whether you start off with a small business checking account and a credit card, to when you have multi-level different types of investments in your company from different banks and financial institutions, I think it's important to make sure you have that relationship in place. So those are some of the key things to kind of start with. And then as you get into business interruption, and we had a severe business interruption with COVID and everything being shut down. So making sure the policies that you have in place can cover those things, I think is going to be important. We also saw workers' compensation insurance becoming something that was critical to have in place, because with our workers, many of them were having different things that may have happened to them while they were either on the job or off the job. So making sure that have in place for your workers is also critical to make sure that you have those in place. So that's kind of from the business perspective. And then from the personal perspective, I also encourage people to make sure you have an emergency savings plan, making sure that you're not commingling the money that you have for your business with the money that you have for your personal life. Because when you try to go back and reconcile those things, that can be a difficult thing to try to separate out. And so you want to make sure you can have that in place. Making sure you have all of your documents easily accessible to you in a safe and secure place. is going to be important as well. Your insurance documents, your important points of contact, all of these things are going to be important. And this falls in both your business side and your personal side. So I really think the planning piece of it is really critical. You need to think about a continuation operating plan, or a COOP plan is how we usually say it in the government. But those are things that you want to make sure that you have in place, because the best time to plan is not in the moment. But unfortunately, COVID, it hit so many of them. Had to make sure that those strategies were in place, and this was the time to test to see if they actually worked.
Thank you. Yes, you hit on a lot of things. We take emergency preparedness also, from the very tactical approach here at SERVE. But I think when I'm meeting with we have a CERT, a community emergency response team. And when I'm meeting with my council, there's always a financial component, because as you mentioned, on the personal side, from a community side, and also from businesses, we want to make sure that you have the resources and ability to have access to everything that you may need. So those are really critical things. Michelle, are there any additional best practices or insights that you would like to provide about investment strategies as it relates to being prepared in times of emergencies?
So what we saw actually in the stock market had a significant crash during when the COVID-19 pandemic started, and many people did not know what to do. And the first thing I tell people to do is not to panic. Don't make rash decisions when we see something that's an anomaly happen. This is also the time to talk to your broker or whomever you work with for your investments into the stock market or what have you, so that they know and you know what your options are. Some policies, some investment programs, they were hit hard, and then some things actually did better and grew during the pandemic. So from the investment side, I think it's critical to make sure that you have that conversation with an individual that helps you with your finances and with your investments, so that you can have a real conversation about what works best for you in your particular situation, because each person's situation is different. And we have to remember, when we invest for the long term, typically there is the assumption that there are going to be ups and downs in the market. And you want to make sure that you are properly diversified in a way that you can weather some of these storms. And that can be only personalized to you and your particular situation.
Great. I think that's a great information there. Brandi, what were some things, I'm gonna bring a question back to you. What are some resources that you wish you had available prior to the pandemic that are critical now moving forward? Michelle, you talked about, being able to lessons learned and kind of move forward more thoughtfully. What are some of those things that you wish you had that you now know are a top priority?
I don't know. Good question, Alexis. And I don't know directionally if this is where you're going. But one thing I saw while we were going through the pandemic and seemingly still feeling the impact of it was the power of diversification. So Michelle just talked about diversification from a financial side, but I would also say from a business side. And it's not that I didn't know the power of diversification, but it became even more prevalent. So I'll speak to it a little bit. So we're in the metal recycling space. And so we procure scrap metal from different customer segments, whether that be households or contractors, government entities, and even construction companies. And what I was able to see right away was the power of having a diversified model. So what we did, we stopped servicing our households immediately. Sorry about that, because we weren't sure what was happening, right, with the pandemic, and we had a lot of face-to-face interaction, and we were following kind of CDC guidelines. But we shut down one customer segment that we were servicing, but we continued to service those that we could service via a different service model. So I would call them our larger volume generators, where we could actually kind of deploy a container and come back. So For that reason, I know in the middle of COVID, and I was looking even at business models and how you can operate differently, is I saw the power of diversification. And so that is something that I think we should, as business owners, always be looking at, is do I have all my eggs? So we can look at that financially, and you also look at that from a strategy standpoint. You know, how many eggs do I have in one basket? Because if one supply chain gets cut off, do I have other ways of sustaining? And so that's one thing that, you know, for us, we were diversified, but I almost wish we were diversified even more. Right. And so that to me was one of the biggest things, honestly. And the second thing I would say is just to know it's coming, but that's what emergency is, right? It's just having the ability to be able to adjust or shift. So for me, it would be the diversification piece.
I totally agree. I said we became pivoting experts, right?
Yes. Yes.
So we know that there's just such value with not having, as you mentioned, your eggs in one basket. You've got to have a plan A. You got to be able to do things one way and then say, we can't do this. Like, let's go all the way around and do it a very different way. So you had to be really nimble. I think as business owners, you could agree, you know, that being nimble really sets you apart to be able to sustain yourselves. Because if you were too committed to your traditional ways of doing business, you just said you did not have enough information to say, yeah, let's just go to homes. You know, we were in that place where we didn't know. We wanted to maintain safety, so we had to think creatively and innovatively around how we could still meet our customer demands, our missions, but just through different new ways. And so I think you really had to lean in. It's interesting enough, you mentioned that your industry that you're in, and I would imagine that there are not a lot of women business owners in the industry that you were in. How did you find support? And how did you, I'm certain that you came out as a leader, but what was your kind of approach to finding support with people who knew kind of some of the dynamics that you were handling?
Actually, I spoke earlier about having relationships lined up, and I kind of poised it toward banking relationships, but how, Alexis? I think by already having relationships in place. I think Michelle is hitting some great ones. But it is important to have solid, wise communities around you. So if you got to have your insurance in place, right? You want to have your money in place, but you want to have solid communities. And so for me, that, I'm a part of an organization called the Women's Presidents Organization. So this is something that I was a part of pre-COVID, and it was a force to be reckoned with, there was a pool to draw on from there. I'm also, like I said, on the board of the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries. I was a part of a relaunch of a Women in Recycling Council about 2 years ago. So that came in quite timely. Having mentors already lined up or in place across the states so that I could get different regional perspectives. And so I would encourage people to be very thoughtful and intentional about cultivating relationships. Genuine and authentic relationships, because I have to tell you, Alexis, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel alone in terms of what was going on. But the other thing that is an intangible, and as I think about it in hindsight, we've spent a lot of time focused on our culture. And I do think that this is influenced because I am a female leader, probably with a psychology and business background. And so we spent a lot of time focused on our employee mindset, even before COVID. And I know that it sounds so soft and, not as tangible, but we did things starting about 3 years ago. And this ties into your questions, where we would do daily mantras, where we talk about getting our mind right. And we talk about being focused and ready for the day and not letting the circumstance dictate how we were going to respond. And I tell you, those things already ingrained and rooted in the team made it so much easier even to guide a team who could see almost chaos and confusion around. And so I think when you have the relationships and when you have people who might want to collapse around you, but still have some wherewithal inside, I think it makes it more doable.
Yes, that is true. And I think you mentioned this earlier, the transparency piece really helped as well. So during the pandemic, I had a 7-month-old and a 3-year-old. Michelle will attest, many of a meeting would be.
Congratulations, Alexis.
And it was a lot because we as a district, my leader, our fearless leader, Mayor Bowser, she was dynamic, but she had a vision for how we were going to get out of this. And it wasn't just we're going to get out, but it was going to get out better. So yes, it was more equitable. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. And so I had to show up in many ways. And I had a young family, and there was so much. And as you also shared, our role, we are the district's volunteer and donation leaders, and you know, we receive all the donations. And so we were having to show up in unprecedented ways. And so people got to see my kids a lot on Zooms. They got to, you know, see me, you know, when I'm made up and when I'm not made up, and when I was cooking dinner and doing this. But I think to your point about culture, it proved me as a leader. And it brought that connection, not only to your team members, but to whoever your constituents or your clients, or, you know, that we're all in this together. And I think that people really appreciated that, to know that. And I'm gonna pivot back to Michelle, but before we do that, I do want to also bring in that there wasn't just one public health emergency happening here. We also dealt with a lot around racial, you know, the reckoning of our country. And so there was so much that you had to stand up as a leader and be prepared. You had to be, this is another dynamic that we're adding on about being prepared. It was more from where do you stand on this in light of, you know, where do you stand on equity in so much going on, and how, you know, were you prepared to be at that intersection of the public health emergency plus what our country was, you know, making sense of around race relations? And that's for either one of you. I just want to know, like, what business senses and what kind of best practices came out of that.
You know, you said something, and then Michelle, I'll gladly turn it over, but I just want to put a button on something you talked about. You talked about just kind of the authentic journey, and you talked about operating from the space in which you were in, meaning it's like, I need to show up where I'm at right now to move forward. And I just wanted to address a couple of things. I think in terms of emergency preparedness, in your question, I think focus and minimizing distractions as a leader and as a business owner is absolutely critical. And so again, you talked, Alexis, and I love how you said we learned how to be different leaders during that time. And it became so clear to me that I needed to navigate the waters today, and that was like last year, but also focus on the future. So you can't get so mired in just what's happening today. You do need to be able to navigate the waters, but it's almost like you need a sight out as well. And if you, to the latter part of your question, for me, it was about being aware of what was happening around me. Also grounding back in personal values as well as our business values, and not getting distracted, being very clear of who we were, what we stood for, and staying that course. And so our language around, you know, one of the values is respect, you know, at South Post Oak Recycling Center. So respect during COVID, respect during 2020's, you know, crisis. That's how we're going to live. And so we just anchored back around our values and I'll let Michelle speak to it a little bit. But that focus, that minimizing distraction, and that's anchoring back around our company values so as to not get caught up in emotional, but very serious whirlwinds of conversation. Those were some things that we did.
Nice, thank you. Michelle, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I really wanted to talk through the transparency piece. And when we think about what was going on, many of us did not know how to react. And being very clear and transparent, you know, we are going through something. and we're going to figure this out together. I think that was important, especially for my team, especially for the District of Columbia. We did have a mayor who took this pandemic and she figured it out with a great team of folks. And we did the best that we could as a district. And we focused on our values. We focused on making sure there was equity for all. How do we reach the least of these as well as everyone else in the city? And I think that was critical when we were thinking about our recovery. Not only, what are we doing now, but how do we recover and how do we make it better? Just as you mentioned, I also think there was a lot of grace that people took, like before. People were just very cut off. If it didn't work, if it wasn't right, I'm not doing it and all that. Then all of a sudden you had to have a level of grace to deal with many folks and many of the different situations, because everything was different on a daily basis, whether you had to work from home with children, all of a sudden taking meetings, because now you have childcare that you have to be concerned about, especially as a woman business owner or leader. These were all things that we had to think through for our families, for our businesses, for our employees, and still be able to thrive. And so I love the idea, Brandi, that you said you did mantras on a daily basis. And that's something I do in my personal life, but, bringing it into the business world, I think that's critical too. How do you keep your business and your employees in a space that they can operate despite what else is going on around them? So I think those were some really great things to add to the conversation, and something that I'm going to write down and try to add to what I do and even my work.
Absolutely. And the focus and minimizing distractions. I'm going to take that home and in the in the business community and space. Those are really valuable things. Michelle, can you talk a little about, I really made a segue there in terms of sharing that our leader wanted to build back better, right? And really to making sure that we were having that equity lens in everything that we do. Can you speak to a little bit about at DISB, your financial equity and what services or resources that you have to ensure that young entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, minority entrepreneurs have resources to have that equity and are able to recover and be resilient business leaders?
Sure. From the district's perspective and from our agency director's perspective, who let me recognize is Karima Woods. She is our commissioner. They really, really wanted us to think about equity in a way that made sense for our constituents. And for our constituents is not only the residents of the District of Columbia, but also the businesses that we with. And so how do we start to make sure all of these different people, these organizations and entities at different places were able to get something that was equitable? And so for us, we took a deep dive internally first. How do we make sure that we are providing equitable resources to our community? And so we created a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force within our agency to really take a look at all of these different things. We also really, really focused on providing our residents with financial education and financial information that was timely. One thing that I do know is when people are going through an emergency, you need to help them through that emergency and that time. It's really not really the time to try to start educating someone at that moment. You want to get them through that emergency and provide them the resources. So once they get out of it, then they can start to think about what are those resources that are available. So we were creating many different resources so that folks could deal with what was happening now in the present, and then also think through what are their options moving forward. So those were some of the things that we did. That's not a long list of everything that we did, but that is just some of those key things that we wanted to make sure people were able to access. And when I think about resources, I just want to share a few things from the district's perspective. You can always check out our website, disb.dc.gov. There were some resources there specific to the District of Columbia. And we will talk about disaster preparedness and dealing with those particular issues. On the national level, you can also get that information from ready.gov, and that's through FEMA's website to prepare both individuals and businesses for how to deal with their particular circumstances. And many of these organizations really were focused on making sure that they could be equitable in those resources, because we saw who was really being impacted by COVID-19 and a public health emergency. And we wanted to make sure that all of our residents in the District of Columbia could be helped and served in an appropriate fashion.
And I think, thank you so much for that, Michelle. I think another untapped kind of population or a takeaway from all that we've experienced is the future generation, right? Of young people who we know will be the best business leaders, and what information we could both demonstrate for them and also impart to them as they learn how to navigate something this, kind of substantial. And so, with us, I know you too, Michelle, with our summer youth employment program, we didn't back away from what COVID taught us. We brought some of those elements and the lessons learned to the young people so they would know how to navigate. And so certainly financial literacy is a part of that and was really important. Financial empowerment certainly was a part of that. How to be prepared in their neighborhoods, in their schools, how to be a leader in preparedness if they are to encounter some, a act of violence or things like that. So those are really some other elements that we think through now as we're continue to navigating, but on this side. And then certainly how emergency preparedness can be in itself a workforce development. And these are skills that you can take. You might want to have your own business around emergency preparedness. So that is another way that we wanted to make sure that young people who are witnessing so much, and we don't know what it feels like to witness this in their perspective at that age, but to understand what we do really matters to them, and they're looking at us as leaders. If anyone wants to touch more on that, that's definitely something I would like to share more about.
I'll take it and then I'll pass it over to Brandi, because as Alexis mentioned, we did have a program, our summer youth employment program, and I know many are there in all over the country. And I'm actually part of one of the summer programs that we work together. It's called Summer Jobs Connect, where we connect with cities all across the United States to talk about how we will engage youth with summer work programs, as well as with financial education and really financial preparedness. And so what we found was critical was for young people to understand the importance of building a solid foundation. And that is true whether you are in an emergency or not. Having a solid foundation, understanding the importance of building those banking relationships, that was an important piece, and understanding where to get resources and how to manage your money in an appropriate fashion. But then also understanding that you can ask questions. There was ways that you can engage, and we hosted a financial literacy hour.
Okay.
All of our youth every day for the entire summer program, where we were giving them resources, information, and practical ways to learn about managing their finances. And some emergency preparedness snuck into that as well. And so with all of that, I think our young people, we're really trying to build them up to be resilient in dealing with whatever situation may come your way. There's a way to get out of it. And if you have a proper plan and you can think through logically what your options are, then you can get through it.
Nice. That's great. Brandi, did you want to share anything about that subject?
Yeah, just really quickly, and I love Michelle's focus on probably more school age as well, K through 12 and probably even beyond. I think is important for us. The angle is interestingly more at a probably post high school and collegiate level. And so last year we actually, I'm a big believer in when stuff is hitting the fan or when it seems like crisis, it's also a good time to focus externally and see ways that you can still give and have an impact. And so I see that question tied to it. And so for us, it was ensuring that we continue to create a pipeline for students. So we worked with a couple of local universities here I would probably say by month 3 of the pandemic, where we were back in a position where we could actually hire interns. So these are students who otherwise were doors that they had open were recently closed because the companies that they had procured internships with were no longer available. The other angle that I think we could affect kids and families is through parents. And so something that we didn't have, and so I'm sure other small businesses can relate, we didn't have 40 hours of work available to our employees, quite frankly, early COVID. But we made a choice to keep our people on payroll. But what we did during that time is we actually focused on educating folks. Our employees went through Financial Peace University, and I deal with a large and I love them working class population, blue collar class, and to be honest, a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And we can extend loans to the workforce. But we could also equip them to be able to be better financial stewards and then ultimately pass that along to their kids. So ideally, they're going back to the channel that Michelle just talked about. So for us, it was that workforce pipeline, as well as just building the capabilities or knowledge set of the parents, i.e. our employees.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it goes back to what we say when you have those skills as a person or a professional, it really, you're not going to do anything but leverage it more in a professional setting. So that's great. I'm gonna touch on one thing that is the elephant in the room here, because we're on a webinar, and that is really technology. What would we be without technology and technology's role in being prepared? I think we all know that it is essential at this point, and it's a part of our infrastructure. Can we talk a little bit more, any of you, either Michelle or Brandi, how technology showed up in you being prepared within your organization or your company, and what additional investments are you prepared to do now, knowing just how essential technology is? And so if you all could share a little insight on that, that would be great.
I'd be happy to start. I think first and foremost, it allowed us to conduct business more efficiently. Aside, you have to get over the initial shock waves, and I'm somebody who was on planes, trains, and automobiles almost every week pre-COVID, and had to learn really quickly how to continue to cultivate relationships, take care of our customers via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, and so. While things, shift and changes can be uncomfortable at first, one of the silver linings for us through COVID was having IT platforms already in place so that we could shift, and actually communicate and connect with our customers very effectively on these platforms. And so I know people are quote unquote zoomed out, but I think it has also created some efficiencies in how we do business.
Great. Michelle, did you want to add?
Sure. I completely agree with Brandi. We definitely had to shift to that online perspective. For me as well, I did many in-person meetings prior to, and switching to the technology did not slow anything down. It actually made it even more efficient and more effective to reach and engage with multiple people, instead of having to try to get everybody to come to one meeting place at 1 o'clock in the afternoon or what have you. And with travel and parking and all of that, everybody was able to sit in their office to still be very effective and engaged. What I saw was our young people and our seniors adapting to the technology to be able to do things that they had not been able to do before. A funny story was my mother she wasn't able to go to Bible study, if you will, because it was at night and she wasn't going out of the house at night because then when she came home, it would be dark. So she didn't feel safe doing that. All of a sudden, she could get on Zoom and the whole church and everybody could do the Bible study. And it was actually opening up opportunities for folks. And so I think technology, if we embrace it, it can help us. We found it to be part of our infrastructure. And so as a city, we wanted to also make sure this was another thing where we could be equitable and make sure that everyone could have access. So we saw that there were hurdles where people could not access technology. And so we created programs. One of the programs was Tech Together. So everyone would be able to have the access to the technology so they will be able to engage in school, in personal things, so that technology really was able to hit home and really help us through this pandemic.
Yeah, that's great. I think we knew that technology had value, but through the pandemic, we saw just how essential it was. And so it kind of moved from I think I need this, or to a critical list. And we talk about our emergency plan and things that we need to have in place. Certainly technology is one of the top ones on the list because it gives you the flexibility and accessibility to be able to conduct businesses. And so we know that. And so when there are barriers, to your point, Michelle, with accessing technology, either from a resource or from the skills, we know that is critical. And so we definitely want to make sure that business leaders have those resources to even, all of their team are able to leverage technology in a useful way. So we touched on a lot here. I know this is engaging conversation. I did want to share one other thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to both Brandi and you, Michelle, to provide us with any closing remarks, and then we will be wrapping up our conversation. We know what I'm going to share again is that this month is National Preparedness Month. It's something that is, again, a flagship of who we are here at Serve DC, because we are the district's hub and kind of cheerleader around being prepared. And so we put a lot of pride in that. Again, that's financially being prepared. That is, from a tactical emergency against disasters or in response to disasters. And that is also really that community. And we talked a lot about with the relationship building, being able to be at the table with the multi-sector partners. So that is business leaders and our philanthropic community, our nonprofits, and certainly our residents, and having that trust. And I think we saw in this pandemic, and we continue to see, trust is huge. If people trust you in their vulnerabilities, that is big. And that means that when you're not in a vulnerable state, they will gladly give you their business, or whatever, your kind of exchange would be, because they know that you show up. And so I think we all took away that, and that is something that we continue to do. So if I could just share here at Serve DC, we are taking on Emergency Preparedness Month by really working in partnership with our partners at HCMA. We also run the district commission on national service and AmeriCorps. So we provide capacity building resources and guidance to our AmeriCorps communities and subgrantees. So this year we are really doing a lot to make sure that they continue to feel prepared and that we are recovering and we feel resilient as a community. We're also prepping for our 9/11, which we know it's all kind of, it's the 20th anniversary of another disaster, a traumatic experience that we couldn't have prepared for. But here we are 20 years later, and the way that we choose to celebrate the day or to honor the day is through service. And so we know that when we all come together to hold each other accountable and really to do service with each other, that is when progress happens. So that is something that we are looking forward to here. And so I thank you guys. I just wanted to say thank you to you, Brandi, and to Michelle for this wonderful conversation. I'm going to turn it back over to you for any parting comments or words, and then we will transition. Brandi, did you want to start?
Yeah, not a problem. And Alexis, I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing. It sounds like you were a phenomenal leader and led resiliently and authentically last year. So thank you for that. And and it's been insightful being on here with Michelle to hear what's been going on in your space and how you guys have touched so many areas of the triangle of what people needed, during last year and going forward. And I can very much relate with the work that Walker's Legacy is doing. We're second generation owned business. And for me, part of my wrap up is I do believe that building on a legacy, leading with purpose, and trying to have an impact in the spaces in which we do business is extremely important. And so as we think about, for me, emergency preparedness, I think part of emergency preparedness is being constantly clear on your purpose. And so your purpose and what you stand for. And to me, those are some foundational things. More tangibly speaking, I think what last year showed me was the gratitude around access. We personally procured a lot of grants last year, both federal as well as state and local grants. We were able to participate in pitch competitions here locally in Houston through the Greater Houston Partnership, Greater Houston Black Chamber, as well as waste management. And so through having access and having relationships, that helped through a crisis. The second thing that I would say in closing is the power of just having a learning mindset and having a learning spirit. And so you mentioned, Alexis and Michelle, I personally found there being an overwhelming amount of resources available to small businesses early and mid-COVID, if we want to put kind of a timeline on this, through agencies like the Small Business Development Center or the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses. I think if we seek to learn and we constantly seek to learn, we're better equipped, should an emergency arise. And then last but not least, I think one of the biggest things, in terms of emergency preparedness and even just resiliency is, I mentioned it earlier, your ability to give and look outward, because I think it can bring a bit of joy in the midst of a seemingly storm. We looked for a local, something just put it on my heart during COVID. I said, I knew, and we didn't even talk about the societal dynamics terribly, but I knew that there were a lot of women possibly in abusive relationships that were probably heightened, and statistics show during last year. And so we looked for a local women's shelter that we could support, even while we were just trying to make it. And so for me, it's kind of that access and taking advantage of that. It's that learning spirit, ahead of time and ongoing. And then it's that just ability to not be so self-focused, but outward, despite what's going on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brandi. Michelle?
Oh, Brandi, those were some great words, and I learned a lot being on this call as well. I would say really plan for the future, but live for today. That's something I just wrote down as you were asking me that question. And what we want to be present in our current times, but we also want to be planning for our future. So if I give away or take away one thing from this, I would say really, really think about what it is you want to see going forth, especially as we're thinking about Walker's legacy and we're thinking about building upon what we already have. Think about what's that 5, 10, 15, 20, and beyond plan for yourself, for your business, for your community. How can you engage in a way and give back, not only to your family and your community, but also thinking about yourself as well, because a lot of times I found that women were so focused on everyone else that they weren't thinking about themselves. And so it's self-care, and self-care is so important as well. And so those are the things that I would really want to impart from a personal perspective. And from a business perspective, I would just say this, when you're thinking about times like these, making sure that you have an emergency plan is going to be key. Protecting your critical information and making sure you have access to it. And then really being training your employees and your staff to make sure that they are engaged and understand what to do next. I think that's going to be important as well. And last but certainly not least, I always say this when I end a lot of my programs and training: enjoy the journey. And this life is to be lived and loved. And if you enjoy the journey and you learn a few things along the way, it'll make for a much more exciting and peaceful life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michelle. And yes, and we're here, and that is not to be taken lightly. Our businesses, those of us who have businesses and have come thus far within the pandemic, that is something not to take lightly. And so thank you so much for imparting that. I think a couple of things that were resounding through our conversations, but really about transparency and authentic, being authentic leadership, being gracious and kind of having grace and being benevolent, and even in times of crisis. And I think this all kind of segues back to Walker's legacy, because, I think in the interest of time and everything being so busy and having so many priorities, it's great to have an organization or a business or an entity that gets us, as women, as minorities, and who invest in us and our authentic selves. And that is personally and professionally. And if you can find, Brandi, you mentioned some of the organizations that you are part of. Certainly, Michelle, you are. But if you can find entities and organizations and people that do that invest in you as a whole person, as a business leader, and as a woman, and that is really a rare find, and it's something that you want to hold on tightly to. And so we're really fortunate to have Walker's legacy. Thank them for this dynamic conversation, for acknowledging the power of being prepared, and for inviting these dynamic leaders, both Michelle Hammonds and Brandi Harleaux. Thank you so much for having us today. Thank you also to Comcast RISE for being in partnership with us and hosting this session. And we are looking forward to more dynamic conversations like this. Thank you so much for joining us.